Have you ever wondered if there's like a secret code to learning a new language? A hidden blueprint our brains are supposed to follow no matter what language we're tackling? For a long time, researchers were absolutely convinced they had found exactly that.
So this is the big question that really kicks it all off. Is there a universal map for this stuff? A fixed path that every single learner, whether you're learning Spanish, Japanese, or, Klingon, follows in the exact same order? It's a pretty wild idea, right?
And this whole idea led researchers on this quest for what you could almost call a universal language ladder. The thinking was that there's this step-by-step process that literally everyone climbs on their way to fluency. Which brings us to this key concept, the acquisition order. The theory was actually pretty simple. Everyone learns the grammar of a new language in the same fixed, predictable sequence. It didn't matter if your first language was English or Mandarin. The path was supposed to be the same for everybody. And here's the really crucial part of that assumption. This wasn't about your teacher or your textbook. Nope. The theory proposed that this learning order is just neurologically pre-programmed. It's the idea that our brains are basically hardwired to learn language in one specific way. It's just built in. So you're probably wondering, how did researchers think they'd crack this code? Well, it all came down to these incredible studies on morphemes, which are just the smallest little units of meaning in a language. And what they found, well, it seemed to lay out the entire map clear as day. And what they found was striking. It looked like learners of English, no matter where they came from, were all picking up these little grammar bits in a super consistent order. They'd get the ing ending down first, like in running, then prepositions like in and on, then the plural s. It looked exactly like a predictable ladder to fluency, just one rung at a time. And as they kept looking, the pattern just held. Learners would consistently master articles like a and the before they got the regular past tense ed down. And that tricky third person s, like in he runs, that came even later. For the researchers at the time, this was it. This was the eureka moment. They had found the universal map. So this quote from the research really sums up the bombshell conclusion they came to. And the conclusion was huge. Language learning wasn't really about the teacher or the classroom. It was an inside job. Our brains were just running their own program, organizing and processing the new language according to their own internal, unchangeable rules. But, like any good scientific story, there was a plot twist. As other researchers started to dig deeper into the data, they started finding some pretty significant cracks in this beautifully simple theory. That universal ladder, well, it started to look a little wobbly. Okay, so the first big problem was this whole idea of performance versus competence. Were the studies just measuring what someone could do on a good day, or what they really knew deep down? Think about it. You might totally ace a grammar quiz, that's performance, but then still mess it up in a fast conversation. Critics argued these studies were just catching those quiz moments, not the learner's true, stable knowledge. And then this whole new debate popped up about why this order even existed. The original theory said it was hardwired. But another really compelling idea emerged, the input view. What if the order just reflected how often learners hear these things? The ing form is everywhere in spoken English, but the third person s, a lot less frequent. So maybe it wasn't a pre-programmed ladder at all, but just a reflection of what you hear the most. And the problems just kept piling up. It turned out the learning order for adults didn't perfectly match the one for kids, which kind of weakened that whole universal claim. Plus, the studies were seen as way too narrow. They were looking at a few tiny bits of grammar while totally ignoring the huge, messy reality of learning a whole language. That simple ladder just couldn't support the weight of all this new evidence.
So, while the idea of a simple fixed ladder didn't really hold up under scrutiny, the research wasn't a failure. Not at all. In fact, it forced the entire field to start asking better, more interesting questions, and it led to a much more nuanced understanding of how this all works.
See, those original Morpheme studies, they were completely obsessed with one question. What is the order? They were just trying to map out a sequence, a static list of steps from 1 to 10.
But the debate totally flipped the focus. The new and frankly much more powerful question became, how is each individual step acquired? What's the actual process a learner's brain goes through to master something like the past tense? That's a much more dynamic and way more useful question.
This whole shift led to this really powerful concept of developmental readiness. The idea here is that a learner's brain is kind of like soil. You just can't force a seed to grow before the soil is ready. A teacher could drill you on a complex grammar rule for weeks, but if your mind isn't cognitively prepared to actually integrate it, the lesson it won't stick.
And what's really cool is this has a very practical application, which we see in the Teachability Hypothesis. It basically says that the most effective teaching and the most effective learning happens when you focus on the very next step in your own natural learning path. Trying to jump 5 steps ahead, no matter how hard you study, it's like trying to build the roof of a house before the foundation is even set. It's just not going to work.
Okay, so after all that, what does this actually mean for you, the person who's trying to learn a language? Why does this whole journey, from a simple ladder to a more complex map, even matter? Well, here's the main takeaway. While there isn't one single rigid ladder that every single person climbs in the exact same way, the research does show that our brains aren't just randomly grabbing at grammar rules. We do follow predictable developmental pathways. The journey is more like a winding path through a landscape than a straight ladder, but there is a logic to it.
And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating question to think about. If our brains do have this kind of natural path they prefer to take when learning a new language, what's the best approach for us? Should our learning and teaching methods try to follow that path as closely as possible? Or is there actually some value in challenging it and maybe trying to find some shortcuts? That's something to ponder on your own language learning journey.
So, if you like videos like this, make sure you subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon to get notified every time we post a new video, and share this video with your classmates, teachers, and friends. Thank you all for your input. Let's keep this process efficient and on track.